The first thing you notice inside an old Amish woodshed is the smell. Not fresh pine, not smoke. Something darker, thick, resinous, almost medicinal. I smelled it in a farmhouse outside Berlin, Ohio, in the middle of January, standing next to a stack of firewood so dry it sounded hollow when you knocked two logs together. The old man who owned the place dipped a rag into a black liquid inside a rusted coffee can and wiped it slowly across the cut ends of several split pine logs before stacking them near the stove. I asked him what it was. He said, "Pine tar. Keeps the heat in the wood." I thought he was joking. He was not. And what I learned over the next 3 weeks sent me into a stack of forestry journals, old USDA bulletins, Scandinavian naval records, and one forgotten 1967 trade conference transcript that explained exactly why almost nobody in America has heard of this anymore. Because pine tar was once one of the most important heating and preservation materials on Earth. Entire nations ran on it. Armies depended on it. Farmers sealed homes with it. Wood stoves burned hotter because of it. And when natural gas infrastructure exploded across America after World War II, the old tar systems quietly vanished from every major heating guide almost overnight. Not because they stopped working, because heating systems that consume almost no purchased fuel are very bad business for companies selling fuel. Stay with me, because before this video ends, I'm going to show you the exact Scandinavian pine tar mixture Amish families still use on wood storage, chimney systems, and stove seals to reduce wood consumption dramatically during winter. And I am going to show you the 1967 conference statement where a utility industry consultant openly called traditional biomass efficiency methods economically undesirable for utility expansion. Those were his exact words. Now let me explain what pine tar actually is, because most people today think it belongs on baseball bats or old sailing ships. Pine tar is created through destructive distillation. Heat pine wood slowly in a low oxygen chamber, and the resins liquefy and separate into tar, pitch, turpentine gases, and charcoal. Humans have been making it for at least 2,000 years. The Vikings waterproofed ships. Russian log builders coated cabins to prevent rot. Scandinavian farmers sealed roofs, sleds, tools, boots, and livestock, fencing with it. But the heating application is the part that disappeared. In the late 1800s and the early 1900s, northern homesteaders across Scandinavia and parts of Appalachia discovered that thin applications of pine tar on stored firewood dramatically reduced moisture absorption during winter storage. That sounds minor until you understand what moisture does to wood heat output. A freshly cut log can contain 40 to 60% water by weight. Even seasoned firewood absorbs atmospheric moisture continuously if left exposed to humid winter air. Every percentage point of moisture reduces combustion efficiency because the stove must waste energy boiling water out of the wood before real heat production even begins. The Department of Energy itself states that wet firewood can reduce usable heat output by over 25%. 25% of your wood energy disappears into steam. Pine tar changed that. The tar forms a hydrophobic barrier that slows moisture reabsorption while still allowing internal moisture to escape gradually over time. The result is wood that stays lighter, drier, and hotter, burning through the entire winter season instead of slowly becoming damp again in outdoor storage. An old Amish man in Ohio explained it more simply. Dry wood stays dry. That is the whole trick. But the deeper I dug, the bigger the story became because pine tar was never just about preserving firewood. It was part of a complete low-consumption heating philosophy that industrial America abandoned after 1950. I found references in old forestry bulletins from Maine, Vermont, and Pennsylvania discussing pine tar applications for chimney preservation, stove gasket sealing, woodpile weatherproofing, and even primitive radiant heat enhancement through dark thermal coatings near masonry heaters. The old systems treated heat like something precious that needed to be protected at every stage from forest to flame to wall retention. Modern systems simply assume infinite fuel availability. That assumption changed architecture itself. Smaller windows disappeared, draft barriers weakened, thermal mass construction declined. Homes became dependent on constant high-output heating systems because fuel companies made continuous consumption affordable temporarily. But the Amish never fully trusted that model. They kept building around conservation instead of fuel abundance. That is why the smell of pine tar still exists in their woodsheds today. Now the story takes a turn I was not expecting. In 1944, during wartime fuel shortages, the United States Department of Agriculture Forest Products Laboratory published emergency recommendations that encouraged rural households to improve wood fuel efficiency by weatherproof storage, controlled seasoning, and resin-based sealing methods, including pine tar derivatives. Wartime America suddenly cared very much about efficient fuel usage, because coal, oil, and industrial fuels were being diverted toward the war effort. Suddenly, old low-consumption systems became strategically valuable again. Rural families were encouraged to maximize British thermal units from every cord of wood. But after the war, natural gas infrastructure expanded rapidly across suburban America. Pipeline construction exploded through the 1950s and 60s. Utility companies needed continuous residential demand growth to justify infrastructure investments. And then I found the transcript. October 1967, the American Residential Energy Expansion Conference in Chicago. A consultant discussing post-war heating adoption patterns warned utility executives about what he called consumer reversion toward ultra-low consumption heating habits inherited from pre-war rural traditions. He specifically mentioned wood conservation systems and traditional fuel extending practices as barriers to long-term residential utility growth. Then came the sentence that stopped me cold. Economically, the objective must be continuous dependency on delivered fuel rather than optimization of stored local biomass. Continuous dependency. Not comfort, not efficiency, dependency. That was the goal. And suddenly, everything about modern heating culture started making more sense. Wood stoves became culturally associated with poverty instead of resilience. Fuel conservation became old-fashioned. Thermal efficiency practices vanished from mainstream home construction. Meanwhile, utility bills became normalized as unavoidable facts of life. But the Amish ignored almost all of that cultural transition because they never fully reorganized their lives around centralized utilities in the first place. Which brings me back to the pine tar can in that Ohio woodshed. The mixture Samuel used was almost absurdly simple. Pine tar, boiled linseed oil, a small amount of turpentine. That was it. The linseed oil helps penetration into porous wood surfaces. The turpentine thins the tar for easier application. The result is a dark, weather-resistant coating brushed lightly onto exposed ends of split wood stacks and certain high-exposure surfaces around outdoor stove systems. One batch cost him roughly $3 to make, using bulk materials shared across multiple families. According to his wood records, his annual wood consumption dropped by nearly a full cord after he standardized the treatment system across his wood storage areas in the late 1990s. A full cord in Ohio winter conditions. Think about what that means physically. Less moisture entering the wood means less energy wasted evaporating water. Higher combustion temperatures, cleaner burns, lower creosote formation, more stable overnight heating, reduced chimney buildup. Every part of the heating system improves simultaneously because the fuel itself remains more thermally efficient. Modern heating discussions obsess over furnace technology while almost completely ignoring fuel quality preservation. The Amish start with the fuel first because they understand something modern systems forgot. The cheapest heat is the heat you never lose in the first place. And once I started noticing this principle, it appeared everywhere. Their woodsheds are elevated off the ground to prevent moisture wicking. Roof overhangs extend farther than modern suburban designs to reduce snow saturation. Air gaps are deliberately maintained between stacked rows for continuous drying airflow. Some families even orient wood stacks based on prevailing winter winds to maximize passive evaporation. Pine tar was not an isolated trick. It was one piece inside a complete thermal management philosophy built around preserving every possible unit of stored energy. Now here is the detail almost nobody talks about anymore. Pine tar smoke itself behaves differently during combustion than untreated damp wood smoke. Historically, Scandinavian stove builders observed that properly sealed and seasoned resinous wood created hotter, cleaner secondary combustion zones inside masonry heaters. Modern combustion science partly confirms this. Higher combustion temperatures improve volatile gas ignition, reducing particulate waste and increasing usable heat extraction. In simple language, hotter fires burn more completely. Damp wood smolders. Dry preserved wood combusts aggressively and efficiently. Combustion matters. The Amish never needed laboratory studies to tell them that. They could see it in the chimney: less soot, less buildup, less cleaning, more retained heat. One older farmer near Lancaster told me something I wrote down immediately. Most people think they need more wood. Usually they just have wetter wood. That sentence explains half the American heating problem in one line. Modern households often buy firewood seasonally, store it poorly, burn it damp, lose enormous amounts of energy to steam and incomplete combustion, then compensate by consuming more fuel. Higher consumption becomes normalized. Nobody questions the cycle because the inefficiency itself became culturally invisible decades ago. But before I show you how some Amish families combine pine tar sealing with underground, root cellar style wood curing chambers to create fuel stores that remain dry even through humid winters, there is one more thing you need to understand. Pine tar was not just buried by gas expansion, it was also quietly pushed aside by the modern chemical coatings industry. The timing of that transition tells you exactly where the money went. By the early 1970s, synthetic sealants and petroleum-based wood preservatives had exploded into hardware stores across America. Creosote coatings, industrial water sealers, synthetic weatherproofing compounds. Every one of them sold separately in branded containers with recurring replacement schedules attached. Pine tar almost vanished commercially outside marine use and specialty woodworking. Not because it failed, because a family making its own preservation coating from pine resin, oil, and heat does not generate long-term corporate revenue. And here is the irony. Most synthetic coatings failed faster. Old Scandinavian pine tar coatings on barns and cabins routinely lasted 10 to 20 years before reapplication. Some surviving Norwegian stave churches still contain pine tar treated timbers hundreds of years old. Meanwhile, modern homeowners repaint and reseal surfaces every few seasons because modern coatings prioritize appearance and production speed over long-term durability. The Amish kept using pine tar because durability mattered more than aesthetics. That same philosophy carried into heating. One family I visited outside Lancaster stored winter firewood beneath a partially buried shed built into a hillside. 3 sides earth-backed, constant airflow through lower vents, stable temperature, minimal humidity swings. Pine tar treated stack ends faced outward toward the dampest winter exposure. The result was wood so dry it rang almost like ceramic when struck together. The father of the house told me they had not purchased supplemental heating fuel in over 18 years. Not propane, not heating oil, nothing. Their annual heating cost was chainsaw fuel and labor. That is the part modern heating culture struggles to process. The Amish do not think about heating as a monthly service. They think about it as stored energy management. Every stage matters: how the tree is cut, when the wood is split, how airflow moves through the stack, how moisture is blocked, how combustion is controlled, how heat is retained after the fire dies. Modern systems outsource all of that complexity to utilities and appliances. The Amish kept the knowledge instead. And once you understand the economics, you understand why that knowledge quietly disappeared from mainstream America. A family heating with carefully preserved wood fuel buys dramatically less natural gas, less heating oil, less electricity, less chimney cleaning, less replacement fuel, lower recurring consumption across the board. That is not profitable for centralized energy systems designed around predictable monthly demand. But the pine tar itself is almost laughably affordable. Bulk pine tar still costs only a few dollars per quart. Linseed oil remains inexpensive. Turpentine is widely available. One small batch treats enough exposed wood surfaces for an entire season. And because the coating dramatically extends wood dryness stability, many families report lower total wood usage year after year once proper storage systems are established. Not because the stove changed, because the fuel stopped degrading. That distinction matters. The Amish heating secret was never really one trick. It was the refusal to waste stored energy. That is the deeper system hiding underneath all of this. And maybe that is why the smell of pine tar still hangs around old Amish woodsheds in winter. You are smelling preserved fuel, preserved heat, preserved independence. The utility companies normalize the idea that warmth arrives through a pipeline controlled by somebody else. The Amish never fully accepted that arrangement, so they kept the old systems alive quietly, practically, generation after generation, while most of the country forgot they ever existed. If you made it this far, tell me something in the comments. How much did you spend on heating last winter? And how different would your life look if that number dropped close to 0 permanently? Because the deeper I dig into these systems, the more one pattern keeps repeating. The most powerful forms of independence are usually the ones somebody taught us to stop noticing.